The sound of heavy boots shuffled across worn wooden floorboards as Delilah Taylor fought to maintain her composure. Trembling hands cradled her slightly swollen belly beneath the thin fabric of her once fine dress as she stood waiting behind the auction platform. The year was 1875, and in the dusty frontier town of Silver Creek, Colorado, a woman with no family, no money, and a growing child inside her had precious few options left. "Next up, gentlemen," the auctioneer called out, his voice carrying across the saloon where 24 men had gathered. A fine domestic worker, still young, with skills in cooking and sewing. Starting bid at $20. Delilah forced herself to step onto the platform, blinking against the afternoon light streaming through grimy windows. She kept her gaze fixed on the back wall, refusing to look at the faces of the men who would bid for her services or worse. The room fell to a momentary hush as they noted her condition, followed by low murmurs and several crude jokes. 4 months pregnant, and utterly alone in a town that had already decided her worth, Delilah had reached the end of her desperate journey west. Her husband Thomas had died 6 weeks earlier when their wagon overturned crossing the Platte River. With no family back east willing to take her in and her meager savings stolen at the last trading post, she'd been forced to make an unthinkable choice: sell herself into service, likely indentured servitude, to survive. $20 for the woman, called a gruff voice from the back. 25, countered another man, a saloon keeper whose reputation for mistreating his serving girls was well known. $30, came a slurred bid from a miner who smelled of whiskey even from 10 feet away. Delilah closed her eyes, willing herself not to cry. She had promised herself she would endure whatever came next, for her child's sake if not her own. $200. The voice was clear, steady, and unfamiliar. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd as heads turned toward the entrance of the saloon. Standing in the doorway, silhouetted against the bright afternoon sun, was a tall figure. As he stepped forward, Delilah saw a man perhaps 30 years of age, with broad shoulders and a face weathered by sun and wind. His clothes were dusty from travel, but of good quality, and the gun at his hip was worn in a way that suggested familiarity rather than show. "I said $200, he repeated, walking forward with a purposeful stride. "And that's to buy her freedom, not her service." The auctioneer sputtered. "Now see here, Mr. Isaac Holloway," the stranger supplied, reaching into his vest pocket and extracting a fold of bills. $200 to settle any debts this woman might have and to provide for her immediate needs, unless someone plans to outbid me. No one spoke. $200 was a fortune in Silver Creek, enough to buy a decent plot of land or a small herd of cattle. "Going once," Isaac said, mimicking the auctioneer's usual call. "Going twice." He placed the money on the bar counter with a decisive thump. "Sold to end this disgrace." Delilah finally allowed herself to look directly at the man who had just spent a small fortune apparently to help her. His eyes were a striking blue beneath the brim of his hat, and when they met hers, she saw not pity or ownership, but something she hadn't encountered in weeks: respect. "Miss, if you'll come with me," he said, offering his hand to help her down from the platform. "I believe we have some arrangements to discuss." Still shocked, Delilah hesitantly placed her hand in his and stepped down. The room had fallen into an uncomfortable silence as the town's men watched their entertainment come to an unexpected conclusion. "What's the meaning of this, Holloway?" demanded the saloon keeper who had bid earlier. "You can't just ride into town and interfere with local business." Isaac turned, his expression hardening. "Selling a pregnant widow isn't business, Peterson. It's something I won't stand for in any town I visit." He turned back to Delilah. "Madam, if you have belongings to collect, I'll escort you." Delilah found her voice at last. "I have a small bag at the boarding house. They've given me until sundown to vacate my room." Isaac nodded and guided her toward the door, his hand hovering near her elbow without actually touching her. "Then we'll start there." As they stepped out into the harsh Colorado sunlight, Delilah's mind raced with questions and fears. Who was this man? What did he truly want from her? Had she merely traded one form of servitude for another, perhaps less public but no less binding? "Mr. Holloway," she began hesitantly as they walked down the dusty Main Street, "I don't understand why you would do this." He glanced down at her, his expression softening slightly. "My sister was widowed young with a child on the way. No woman should have to face such circumstances alone, especially not on the auction block." He paused before adding, "I've bought your freedom, Miss Taylor, not your service or companionship. Once we collect your things, I'll help you make arrangements for wherever you wish to go next." For the first time in weeks, Delilah felt a small spark of hope kindle in her chest. But experience had taught her that kindness from strangers often carried hidden costs. "And what do you want in return?" she asked quietly. Isaac stopped walking and turned to face her fully. "Nothing. Contrary to what you might be thinking, there are still a few decent men in the West." He adjusted his hat. "Now, let's get your belongings and find you a proper meal. We can discuss your options after you've had a chance to rest." As they continued toward the boarding house, Delilah realized she was walking alongside the first person in Silver Creek who had treated her as something more than a burden or an object since the day she'd arrived alone and desperate. Whatever came next, at least for this moment, she wasn't facing it alone. The boarding house was a two-story wooden structure that had once been painted white, but now bore the weathered gray patina common to all buildings in Silver Creek. Mrs. Finch, the owner, raised her eyebrows as Delilah entered with Isaac Holloway. "Come for your things, have you?" the older woman asked, her tone making it clear she knew what Delilah had planned to do that afternoon. "I heard the auction was scheduled for today." "There was no auction, madam," Isaac replied before Delilah could speak. "Miss Taylor will be leaving town, but under different circumstances." Mrs. Finch looked between them, speculation evident in her gaze. "I see. Well, your rent was paid through today, so you're welcome to collect your belongings." She sniffed disapprovingly. "I'll need the room key back." Delilah nodded and quickly ascended the narrow staircase to her small room on the second floor. Isaac waited below, exchanging what appeared to be terse words with the landlady. The room that had been her home for the past 3 weeks was barely large enough for a narrow bed and washstand. Her entire life was now contained in a single carpetbag, a few dresses, undergarments, a hairbrush, a worn Bible that had belonged to her mother, and a daguerreotype of Thomas on their wedding day. She touched her husband's image briefly before closing the bag. When she returned downstairs, Isaac was waiting by the door. "I've arranged for us to have a meal at the hotel dining room," he said. "It's more respectable than the saloon and we can talk privately." Delilah followed him to the Grand Western Hotel, the most expensive establishment in Silver Creek. Several townspeople stared as they passed, and she could almost hear the gossip beginning. A pregnant widow with a strange cowboy, it would give them something to talk about for weeks. The hotel dining room was nearly empty at this hour, between lunch and dinner service. Isaac requested a corner table and pulled out a chair for Delilah before taking his own seat. When the waiter approached, he ordered a full meal for each of them without consulting the prices on the menu. "You should eat well," he said, noticing her surprise. "For the baby's sake, if not your own." Delilah studied him openly for the first time. Isaac Holloway was handsome in a rugged way, with lines at the corners of his eyes that suggested he smiled often, though he wasn't smiling much now. His hands were calloused from work, and despite his apparent wealth, he carried himself with the watchful readiness of a man accustomed to danger. "Why are you really helping me, Mr. Holloway?" she asked when the waiter had gone. "The truth, please." Isaac met her gaze steadily. "I told you about my sister, and that was honest. Her name was Mary. She died in childbirth 3 years ago because the town where she lived after her husband's death treated her like she was nothing. No doctor would come." His jaw tightened at the memory. "I was too far away to help. By the time I got word and traveled there, I was burying both her and the baby." Delilah's hand instinctively went to her belly. "I'm sorry for your loss. Since then, I've made it a point to help when I can." He leaned back as the waiter returned with coffee. "I own a cattle ranch about 30 miles north of here, the Double H. I was in town on business when I heard about the auction." His expression darkened. "It's not the first time I've encountered such a situation, but it's the first time I've been able to do something about it." "So what happens now?" Delilah asked, wrapping her fingers around the warm coffee cup. "You said you'd help me make arrangements, but I have nowhere to go and very little money." Isaac considered her for a moment before responding. "I can offer you a position at my ranch. My housekeeper, Mrs. Abernathy, could use help with the cooking and household matters. You'd have your own room in the main house, fair wages, and time to rest before your child comes." He held up a hand before she could respond. "Or, if you prefer, I can purchase a stage-coach ticket to Denver, where there are charitable organizations that assist women in your situation." Delilah weighed her options. Denver meant starting over among strangers in a city she'd never visited. The ranch offered immediate shelter and income, but placed her in the debt and power of a man she'd just met. "How large is your ranch, Mr. Holloway?" she asked, trying to gauge what kind of household she might be entering. 5,000 acres, most of it grazing land. "The house is substantial, built by my father 15 years ago. Besides myself, there's Mrs. Abernathy, who's been with my family since I was a boy, and 8 ranch hands who bunk in the bunkhouse a good distance from the main house." He took a sip of coffee. "It's isolated. I won't pretend otherwise, but it's peaceful. You'd be treated with respect." The waiter arrived with their food, thick slices of roast beef, potatoes, green beans, and fresh bread. Delilah realized she was ravenous and tried to eat slowly despite her hunger. "What about when the baby comes?" she asked after several bites. "A ranch is no place for an infant. Mrs. Abernathy raised me after my mother died. She has experience with children." Isaac's expression softened slightly. "And the ranch is a fine place for a child to grow up. Open spaces, fresh air, animals." "I did." Delilah considered this as she ate. The food was better than anything she'd had since leaving Ohio, and she could feel strength returning to her limbs. "I don't want charity, Mr. Holloway," she said finally. "If I accept your offer of employment, I want to earn my keep. It wouldn't be charity. We genuinely need the help, and you'd be compensated fairly." He studied her face. "May I ask what skills you have, Miss Taylor?" "I was a schoolteacher before I married," she replied. "I can read and write well, keep accounts, cook adequately, and sew. My mother taught me to preserve foods and tend a kitchen garden." Isaac nodded approvingly. "All useful skills on a ranch, and after your child is born, what are your plans then?" Delilah had been avoiding this question even in her own mind. "I don't know," she admitted. "Thomas and I were heading to Oregon to start a new life. We had plans for a small farm." She blinked back sudden tears. "Now I just want my baby to have a chance at a decent life." The position at the ranch could be temporary or permanent, depending on how things develop, Isaac said. "You'd be free to leave whenever you wished, with advance notice." Delilah took a deep breath. "I accept your offer of employment, Mr. Holloway, at least until after my child is born. I can begin work as soon as we reach your ranch." Isaac nodded once decisively. "Good. We'll leave tomorrow morning. The journey takes most of a day, and I wouldn't want to start this late." He reached into his pocket and extracted a key. "I've taken the liberty of securing you a room here for tonight. It's the safest place in town." Delilah stared at the key. A room at the Grand Western would normally be far beyond her means. "That's very generous, but consider it an advance on your wages," Isaac interrupted. "We'll leave at first light. The hotel serves breakfast from 6 o'clock. After they finished their meal, Isaac escorted Delilah to her room on the hotel's second floor. It was luxuriously appointed compared to her previous accommodations, with a real feather mattress and clean linens. "Rest well, Miss Taylor," Isaac said, tipping his hat before turning to leave. "Tomorrow will be a long day, Mr. Holloway," Delilah called after him. When he turned back, she met his eyes directly. "Thank you, not just for the room or the job, but for what you did today. I won't forget it." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Get some sleep, Miss Taylor. I'll see you in the morning." As the door closed behind him, Delilah sat heavily on the edge of the bed, one hand resting on her belly where her child grew. For the first time since Thomas's death, she allowed herself to believe that they might have a future after all. Dawn broke in a blaze of crimson and gold over the eastern plains as Delilah waited in the hotel lobby. She had slept better than expected, the comfortable bed and sense of security allowing her a full night's rest for the first time in weeks. Her carpetbag sat at her feet, containing everything she owned in the world. Isaac arrived precisely at 6, looking fresh and alert despite the early hour. He greeted her with a polite nod and insisted she eat a hearty breakfast before their journey. "The trail to the ranch isn't difficult, but it's long," he explained as they ate. "We'll stop to rest the horses at midday, but otherwise we'll be traveling straight through." By 7 o'clock, they were on their way. Isaac had arranged for a sturdy wagon rather than horseback travel, considering Delilah's condition. The wagon bed was padded with blankets to soften the inevitable bumps, and a canopy provided shade against the Colorado sun. As Silver Creek receded behind them, Delilah felt a curious mixture of relief and apprehension. She was leaving behind a place of humiliation and despair, but heading toward an unknown future dependent on the continuing goodwill of a stranger. The landscape opened before them, vast rolling prairies, dotted with stands of pine and aspen, set against the dramatic backdrop of the Rocky Mountains. After several hours of relative silence, broken only by Isaac's occasional comments about the terrain or wildlife, Delilah decided to learn more about the man who had so dramatically altered her circumstances. "Have you always lived in Colorado, Mr. Holloway?" she asked. He glanced at her before returning his attention to the trail. "Born and raised here. My father came west during the early gold rushes but had the sense to invest in land and cattle rather than chasing elusive strikes. He built the Double H from nothing." Pride was evident in his voice. "After he died 5 years ago, I took over operations. And your mother died when I was 8, influenza." His tone remained matter-of-fact, but Delilah sensed the old pain beneath the words. That's when Mrs. Abernathy stepped in. She was originally hired as a cook, but she became more like family. "You mentioned ranch hands. Are any of them married with families?" Isaac shook his head. "Not currently. Had a married foreman for years, but he and his wife moved to California last spring. The men I employ now are good workers, but they're all single." He seemed to understand her concern. They bunk well away from the main house, as I mentioned. You won't be bothered. Around midday, they stopped beside a clear stream to rest the horses and eat the lunch misses. Abernathy had packed cold chicken, biscuits, and apple preserves. Delilah stretched her legs, grateful for the break from the wagon's constant motion. "We're making good time," Isaac remarked, checking the sun's position. "We should reach the ranch by late afternoon." As they continued their journey, the landscape gradually changed. The open prairie gave way to more varied terrain, gentle hills covered with pine forest, meadows brilliant with wildflowers, and occasional rocky outcroppings. The air grew cooler as they gained elevation. "There it is," Isaac said finally, pointing ahead as they crested a rise. "Double H Ranch." Delilah leaned forward to see. Below them stretched a broad valley bisected by a winding river. Near the center stood a large two-story house built of solid timber, with several outbuildings clustered nearby. Beyond these, fenced pastures extended in every direction, dotted with the dark shapes of grazing cattle. "It's beautiful," she said sincerely. The setting was idyllic, protected by hills on three sides and open to the south, with trees providing windbreaks and the river ensuring water even in dry seasons. "My father chose well," Isaac agreed, guiding the horses down the slope toward home. The valley catches snow in winter but warms quickly in spring. Good grazing almost year-round. As they approached the house, Delilah saw that it was larger and more impressive than she had imagined, a proper frontier mansion rather than the rustic cabin she had expected. The main structure was flanked by a kitchen garden, smokehouse, and what appeared to be a small greenhouse. A stout woman with iron-gray hair emerged onto the wide porch as the wagon pulled up. She was perhaps 60, with a face that suggested both sternness and kindness in equal measure. "You're later than I expected," she called to Isaac, wiping her hands on her apron. Her eyes immediately found Delilah. "And I see you've brought company." "Mrs. Abernathy, this is Miss Delilah Taylor," Isaac said, helping Delilah down from the wagon. "She'll be assisting you with household duties." "Miss Taylor, this is Mrs. Abernathy, who keeps us all in line." The older woman's shrewd eyes took in Delilah's condition at once, but her expression revealed nothing beyond polite interest. "Welcome to Double H, Miss Taylor. You must be tired after the journey. Come inside and I'll show you to your room." The interior of the house was as impressive as its exterior, spacious rooms with polished wooden floors, sturdy furniture that combined function with unexpected elegance, and numerous windows that filled the space with light. It was clear that Isaac Holloway was far wealthier than his modest demeanor had suggested. Mrs. Abernathy led Delilah upstairs to a pleasant bedroom overlooking the river. It was simply furnished but comfortable, with a single bed, dresser, washstand, and rocking chair. "Bathrooms at the end of the hall," the housekeeper explained. "Mr. Holloway's father installed indoor plumbing 2 years before he passed, one of the few houses in the territory with such luxuries. Dinner's at 6 sharp. Take time to rest and freshen up." She paused at the door. "Mr. Holloway explained your situation. This is a good place for a fresh start, Miss Taylor." When Delilah came downstairs that evening, rested and wearing her least worn dress, she found Isaac and Mrs. Abernathy waiting in a dining room that could easily have seated 12. The table was set with fine china and silver that seemed incongruous in this frontier setting. "My mother's," Isaac explained, noticing her surprise at the elegant settings. "Father never could bring himself to part with them, even when times were lean in the early years." Dinner was a hearty affair: roast venison, potatoes, fresh bread, and vegetables from the kitchen garden. The conversation remained politely general, with Isaac inquiring about ranch matters from Mrs. Abernathy and the housekeeper asking tactful questions about Delilah's journey west. After the meal, Isaac excused himself to check on a mare about to foal, leaving Delilah alone with Mrs. Abernathy. "He told me how he found you," the older woman said bluntly once Isaac had gone. "An auction block in Silver Creek." Delilah flushed with shame but raised her chin. "Yes. My husband died crossing the Platte. I had nowhere to go and no money." Mrs. Abernathy nodded, her expression softening. "No judgment from me, girl. The West is hard on women alone." She began gathering dishes. "Isaac is a good man. Too much like his father, sometimes carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. Ever since his sister died, he's had this notion he needs to save everyone." She fixed Delilah with a penetrating gaze. "Just don't mistake his kindness for something else. He's not looking for a wife." "Neither am I looking for a husband," Delilah replied firmly. "I'm grateful for the position and intend to earn my keep, nothing more." Mrs. Abernathy seemed satisfied with this answer. "Good. Now you start work tomorrow. I'll show you the kitchen and storerooms after breakfast. For tonight, rest. You're carrying double the burden these days." The next several weeks established a rhythm to Delilah's new life at Double H Ranch. She rose early to help Mrs. Abernathy prepare breakfast for Isaac and any hands who ate at the main house. Mornings were spent cleaning, baking, or preserving foods from the garden. Afternoons often allowed her a few hours of rest, which her growing pregnancy made increasingly necessary, before helping prepare the evening meal. Isaac was frequently absent during daylight hours, attending to the countless tasks required to manage a large cattle operation. When he was present at meals, he was unfailingly polite but maintained a certain reserve. Occasionally, Delilah would catch him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite interpret, not inappropriate interest, but something more complex. As May turned to June and her pregnancy became more pronounced, Delilah found herself thinking more about the future. The temporary arrangement at Double H had begun to feel surprisingly permanent. Mrs. Abernathy, beneath her gruff exterior, proved to be a wealth of practical knowledge about childbirth and infant care. She had even begun knitting small garments for the baby, expected in late August or early September. One evening in mid-June, after dinner, Isaac invited Delilah to join him on the porch. The twilight was peaceful, with the distant lowing of cattle and chirping of crickets creating a gentle symphony. "You seem to have settled in well," he observed, leaning against the porch railing. "Mrs. Abernathy says you've been a tremendous help." "I enjoy the work," Delilah replied honestly. "It feels good to be useful again." Isaac nodded, his gaze on the distant mountains now touched with the day's last light. "I've been meaning to ask if there's anything you need for your condition. The nearest doctor is in Riverside, about 15 miles east. I could take you for a consultation." Delilah considered this. She had been fortunate to experience few complications so far. "Perhaps in another month, closer to my time. For now, Mrs. Abernathy has been very helpful with advice." She delivered half the children born on neighboring ranches before the territory had proper doctors, Isaac agreed. "Still, if you change your mind, just say the word." He hesitated before continuing. "Have you thought about what you'll do after the baby arrives?" It was the question Delilah had been avoiding. "I assumed I would continue working here if my services remained satisfactory," she said carefully. "Unless you'd prefer I make other arrangements." "Not at all," Isaac assured her quickly. "You're welcome to stay as long as you wish. I just—" He seemed uncharacteristically uncertain. "I want you to know you have choices. This doesn't have to be your final destination if it's not what you want." Delilah studied him in the fading light. "What about you, Mr. Holloway?" Is this what you want running the ranch your father built, alone except for employees? The question seemed to surprise him. The ranch is my responsibility, my legacy. He looked out over the property. As for being alone, I was engaged once 3 years ago. Catherine was the daughter of a banker in Denver. She came to visit the ranch once during summer. A wry smile touched his lips. Winter would have been more honest. She lasted 2 days before declaring she could never live so far from civilization. Returned my ring a week later. I'm sorry, Delilah said softly. Isaac shrugged. It was for the best. This life isn't for everyone. The isolation, the constant work, the uncertainty of weather and markets. He glanced at her. But you seem to have adapted well. I was raised on a small farm in Ohio, Delilah explained. This is actually more comfortable than my childhood home. She traced patterns on the porch railing with one finger. Thomas, my husband, promised me an easier life in Oregon. He had plans to open a mercantile. Her voice caught slightly. But I'm finding I prefer this simpler existence. There's an honesty to it. They stood in companionable silence as darkness settled fully over the valley. In the distance, a coyote called, its haunting cry echoing against the hills. We should go in, Isaac said eventually. Morning comes early. As Delilah turned to enter the house, her foot caught on an uneven board. She stumbled, and Isaac's hand shot out to steady her, gripping her elbow firmly. The contact, the first time he had actually touched her since helping her from the auction platform, sent an unexpected warmth through her arm. Careful, he said, his voice low. For a moment they stood closer than they ever had before, his blue eyes dark in the evening shadows. Thank you, Delilah managed, suddenly aware of the rapid beating of her heart. Good night, Mr. Holloway. Isaac, he said, releasing her arm. I think after all this time you might call me Isaac. Delilah nodded. Then you must call me Delilah. Good night. Isaac. As she climbed the stairs to her room, Delilah scolded herself for the flutter of emotions that simple exchange had evoked. She was a pregnant widow, dependent on his charity regardless of how it was disguised as employment. Any feelings beyond gratitude were inappropriate and unrealistic. Yet as she prepared for bed, Delilah couldn't help remembering the warmth of his hand on her arm and the unexpected gentleness in his eyes when he'd asked her to use his given name. July brought scorching heat to the Colorado highlands. The river that bisected Double H property ran lower than usual, and the lush meadows began to take on a golden hue. Ranch work intensified as the summer cattle drive approached, and Isaac was often gone from sunup to sundown, returning exhausted for late dinners. Delilah's pregnancy had progressed to the point where even simple tasks became challenging. Her ankles swelled in the heat, and her back ached constantly. Mrs. Abernathy insisted she rest more frequently, taking on the heavier household duties herself despite Delilah's protests. You'll have plenty of work once that little one arrives, the older woman declared firmly. Save your strength. One sweltering afternoon, as Delilah sat shelling peas in the relative coolness of the kitchen porch, she heard the sound of approaching hoofbeats. Looking up, she saw Isaac returning unusually early, accompanied by a stranger, a middle-aged man with a black bag who could only be a doctor. Miss Taylor, Isaac called as he dismounted. This is Dr. Wilson from Riverside. I thought it best he examine you, given how close you must be to your time. Delilah set aside her work and stood awkwardly, one hand supporting her lower back. That's very thoughtful, but I'm managing well. Dr. Wilson, a kindly-looking man with spectacles and a gray-streaked beard, approached with a professional smile. Mr. Holloway is right to be cautious, Miss Taylor. First pregnancies can be unpredictable, especially in remote locations. Mrs. Abernathy appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. About time we had you out here, doctor. The girl's been on her feet too much despite my scolding." She gave Isaac an approving nod. "You can wait in the study. This won't concern you." The examination took place in Delilah's bedroom with Mrs. Abernathy present as propriety demanded. Dr. Wilson was thorough but respectful, checking Delilah's pulse, blood pressure, and the position of the baby. "Everything appears normal," he concluded, packing his instruments. "The baby is positioned correctly and seems a healthy size. I'd estimate you have about 4 to 6 weeks remaining." He prescribed rest, plenty of fluids, and specific preparations for the birth. "I'll leave some medicines with Mrs. Abernathy, just precautions, mind you." Before departing, Dr. Wilson spoke privately with Isaac. Delilah, watching from the porch, saw Isaac nod seriously several times and count money into the doctor's hand far more than a standard examination would warrant. After dinner that evening, when Mrs. Abernathy had retired to her rooms, Delilah confronted Isaac in the study where he was reviewing account books. "You arranged for Dr. Wilson to remain nearby until after the birth, didn't you?" she asked without preamble. Isaac looked up, surprised. "He told you?" "No, but I saw you paying him, and it was clearly more than today's visit cost." She sat in the chair across from his desk. "That's an extraordinary expense, Isaac." He closed the ledger. "He's staying with the Jennings family at the next ranch over. Their youngest has a chronic chest condition, so he was coming this way regardless." He met her eyes directly. "But yes, I've paid him to remain within call until your child is delivered safely." "Why?" "You know why," Isaac replied quietly. "What happened to my sister won't happen to you. Not while you're under my roof." Delilah felt tears prick at her eyes. "That's the most generous thing anyone has done for me since." She trailed off, unable to continue. "It's nothing extraordinary," Isaac insisted, clearly uncomfortable with her emotion. "Just common sense." "No, it's much more than that." Delilah gathered her courage. "Isaac, I need to ask something important. What happens after the baby comes?" Truly, he studied her for a long moment. "What do you want to happen?" "I want to stay," she admitted, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. "These past months, despite everything, I've found peace here. A purpose." She placed a protective hand on her belly. "My child could have a good life at Double H with fresh air and space to grow, and I've come to care very much for this place, and its people." Something flickered in Isaac's eyes, hope perhaps, or relief. "Then stay," he said simply. "We've grown accustomed to having you here. Mrs. Abernathy would be devastated if you left." "And you?" Delilah asked softly. "Would you be disappointed if I left?" Isaac stood and moved to the window, his back to her. For several heartbeats he was silent. When he finally turned, his expression was more open than she had ever seen it. "Yes," he admitted, "I would be more than disappointed." He took a deep breath. "Delilah, I know your circumstances make this complicated. You're still grieving your husband, preparing for a child, dependent on this position. I've tried to maintain proper distance to give you space and time, but I find myself—" He paused, searching for words. "I find myself thinking of you as more than an employee, more than a responsibility." Delilah's heart pounded in her chest. "How do you think of me then?" "As someone I could care for deeply, given time. Someone who brings light into rooms that were dark before she arrived." His voice grew quieter. "Someone I would like to know better, once your child is born and you've had time to adjust to motherhood, if you were interested in such a possibility." Delilah had not expected such honesty, nor the surge of emotion it produced within her. She had been so focused on survival, on getting through each day, that she had scarcely acknowledged her growing feelings for this quiet, honorable man. "I would be interested," she whispered. "Very interested." The smile that transformed Isaac's face made him look years younger. Then we have something to look forward to, beyond the immediate concerns." He walked her to the base of the stairs when she retired that night, maintaining a respectful distance, but with a new warmth in his eyes that sent Delilah to bed with a sense of possibility she hadn't felt since long before Thomas's death. The final weeks of pregnancy passed in a blur of preparation. Mrs. Abernathy, delighted by the prospect of a baby in the house again, unearthed a cradle that had once been Isaac's from the attic and set it up in Delilah's room. Isaac himself constructed a rocking chair, working late into the evening after his ranch duties were complete. "My father made one for my mother when she was expecting me," he explained when he presented it to Delilah. "Every child deserves to be rocked to sleep." August brought afternoon thunderstorms that cooled the air temporarily before leaving behind a steamy dampness. Delilah found herself increasingly uncomfortable, her body ungainly and her patience thin. Isaac and Mrs. Abernathy bore her occasional irritability with good humor. "You're carrying all out front," Mrs. Abernathy observed one evening as she helped Delilah prepare for bed. "My mother would have said that means a boy." Delilah smiled tiredly. "Thomas wanted a son to teach farming to." Her smile faltered. "I just want a healthy child who will know love, even without a father." Mrs. Abernathy patted her hand. "This baby will have plenty of people who care for it, including a certain rancher who's been walking around with his head in the clouds lately." Before Delilah could respond to this observation, a sharp pain gripped her abdomen. She gasped, clutching the bedpost for support. "What is it?" Mrs. Abernathy asked sharply. "A pain," Delilah managed as it subsided. "Stronger than the practice contractions I've been having." The older woman nodded briskly. "Might be time, or might be another false alarm. Let's get you comfortable and see if more follow." By midnight, there was no doubt. Delilah's labor had begun in earnest, with contractions coming regularly and increasing in intensity. Mrs. Abernathy sent one of the ranch hands galloping toward the Jennings place to fetch Dr. Wilson. Isaac paced the downstairs hall like a caged animal, wincing each time a muffled cry reached him from above. When the doctor finally arrived, he clasped the man's hand with desperate gratitude. "She's young and strong," Dr. Wilson reassured him as Mrs. Abernathy led him upstairs. "Try not to worry unnecessarily." The hours that followed were among the longest of Delilah's life. Pain unlike anything she had ever experienced washed over her in relentless waves. Between contractions, she was vaguely aware of Dr. Wilson's calm instructions, Mrs. Abernathy's capable assistance, and the first pale light of dawn filtering through the curtains. "You're doing splendidly," the doctor encouraged as the labor intensified. "The baby is positioned perfectly. Just a bit longer now." Delilah summoned strength she didn't know she possessed for the final phase of delivery. With one last tremendous effort, she felt the baby slide from her body, followed immediately by a thin, indignant wail. "A beautiful baby boy, Doctor," Wilson announced, quickly clearing the infant's airways and wrapping him in a clean blanket. "Healthy lungs, good color." Mrs. Abernathy placed the tiny bundle in Delilah's arms. Through tears of exhaustion and joy, she gazed down at her son's wrinkled red face. He had Thomas's chin and her own dark hair, a perfect blending of them both. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "I've been waiting for you." After ensuring that both mother and child were stable, Dr. Wilson allowed Isaac to enter briefly. He approached the bed hesitantly, his expression a mixture of concern and wonder. "A boy," Delilah told him, tilting the bundle so he could see. "Samuel Thomas Taylor." Isaac stared down at the infant, clearly moved. "He's perfect," he said softly, "just like his mother." Their eyes met over the baby's head. And Delilah saw in Isaac's gaze a depth of emotion that transcended mere words. In that moment, exhausted and vulnerable as she was, she recognized that she was falling in love with him, had perhaps been falling since the day he had rescued her from the auction block. "You need rest," he said, breaking the spell. "We'll talk later." The days following Samuel's birth passed in a haze of feedings, diaper changes, and snatched moments of sleep. Mrs. Abernathy proved invaluable, showing Delilah how to bathe the infant, swaddle him properly, and recognize his different cries. Isaac kept a respectful distance, but made his support known through practical gestures, ensuring the house remained quiet during daytime naps, personally bringing meals to Delilah's room when she was too tired to come downstairs. And once, when Samuel was particularly fussy, walking the colicky infant for 2 hours in the night to allow Delilah uninterrupted sleep. By early September, Delilah had regained enough strength to resume light household duties while caring for Samuel. One crisp afternoon, she bundled the baby warmly and took him onto the porch for some fresh air. She was singing softly to him when Isaac returned from inspecting fence lines. "You have a lovely voice," he remarked, dismounting and approaching. "May I join you?" Delilah nodded, shifting Samuel so Isaac could see his face. The baby was awake, dark blue eyes blinking in the afternoon light. "His eyes are changing color," Isaac observed, settling into the chair beside her. "They're becoming more like yours." "Mrs. Abernathy says most babies start with blue eyes," Delilah replied. "But yes, I think they'll be brown eventually." She hesitated before asking, "Would you like to hold him?" Isaac looked startled, then pleased. "If you're sure." Delilah carefully transferred Samuel to Isaac's arms, showing him how to support the baby's head. The contrast between the tiny infant and the strong, capable cowboy was striking and deeply affecting. Isaac handled Samuel with extraordinary gentleness, his usual confidence giving way to cautious wonder. "Hello, Samuel," he murmured. "You're a fortunate young man to have such a brave mother." Samuel yawned widely, his tiny fists waving, then settled contentedly against Isaac's chest. "He likes you," Delilah observed. "Smart boy," Isaac replied with a small smile. He looked up at Delilah, his expression growing more serious. "I've been thinking about our conversation before he was born, about the future." Delilah nodded, suddenly nervous. "As have I." "I meant what I said then." Isaac's voice was low and earnest. "These past months, watching you face difficulty with such grace, seeing your kindness to Mrs. Abernathy and your dedication to preparing for Samuel, I've come to admire you tremendously. And those feelings have grown into something more." He carefully returned Samuel to Delilah's arms before continuing. "I know it's too soon to speak of marriage. You're still healing, still adjusting to motherhood, still honoring the memory of Thomas. But I want you to know that when you're ready, if you ever become ready, my feelings will be waiting." Delilah blinked back tears. "Isaac," he held up a hand. "You don't need to respond now. There's no hurry. I just wanted you to know where I stand." That night, after Samuel was settled in his cradle, Delilah stood at her bedroom window gazing out at the star-filled Colorado sky. Her thoughts were in turmoil. She had loved Thomas sincerely. Their marriage, though brief, had been happy and filled with shared dreams. Did allowing herself to develop feelings for Isaac dishonor that love? Yet in her heart, Delilah knew Thomas would not have wanted her to spend her life alone. He had been practical and kind, always putting her welfare first. He would want Samuel to have a father, want Delilah to have companionship and security, and her feelings for Isaac were genuine, different from what she had felt for Thomas, but no less real. Isaac's quiet strength, his integrity, his unexpected tenderness toward Samuel. All had worked their way into her heart despite her initial reservations. The question was not whether she could love Isaac, she already did, but whether she was ready to acknowledge that love and act upon it. As autumn painted the Double H Valley in russet and gold, Delilah and Samuel settled into a comfortable routine. The baby thrived, growing plumper and more alert with each passing week. Delilah gradually resumed her full share of household duties, with Samuel often nearby in a basket or cradled against her chest in a sling Mrs. Abernathy fashioned. Isaac maintained his promised patience, never pressuring Delilah for a response to his declaration. Instead, he demonstrated his feelings through consistent kindness and growing involvement with Samuel. He began taking the baby for short periods each evening, allowing Delilah time to herself while he introduced his young charge to the wonders of ranch life, even if Samuel was far too young to appreciate the lessons on cattle breeding or winter wheat plantings that Isaac solemnly delivered. As October brought the first dusting of snow to the highest peaks, Delilah made her decision. She asked Mrs. Abernathy to watch Samuel for the afternoon and sought out Isaac in the barn, where he was repairing tack in preparation for winter. He looked up as she entered, surprise and pleasure crossing his face. "Delilah, is everything all right?" "Everything is fine," she assured him, gathering her courage as she approached. "I wanted to speak with you privately." Isaac set aside his work, giving her his full attention. "I'm listening." Delilah took a deep breath. "I've been thinking about what you said about your feelings and the possibility of a future together." She met his gaze steadily. "I want you to know that I share those feelings. These past months have shown me what kind of man you are, Isaac Holloway. Honorable, compassionate, hardworking." Her voice softened. "The kind of man I could build a life with, the kind of father I would want for Samuel." Hope dawned in Isaac's eyes, but he remained cautiously still. "Are you saying?" "I'm saying that if your offer still stands, I'm ready to consider a future together." Delilah's heart pounded, but her voice remained steady. "Not immediately. I think we should give ourselves time to court properly, to be certain. But yes, I could envision becoming your wife someday." Isaac's face transformed with joy. He stepped toward her, then hesitated, respecting the boundaries that had existed between them. "May I?" He began uncertainly. Delilah closed the distance between them and reached for his hand. The touch was simple, but profound, the first deliberate contact they had shared that wasn't related to Samuel's care or household duties. His fingers closed around hers, warm and strong. "We'll take things slowly," Isaac promised, his thumb gently tracing patterns on her palm. "Get to know each other properly. Let Samuel grow a little more, but Delilah." His voice grew husky. "I've been falling in love with you since the moment you walked into my home with your head high despite everything you'd been through. I'll wait as long as you need." The courtship that followed was both traditional and unconventional. They lived under the same roof, shared meals, and jointly cared for Samuel, yet maintained propriety in ways that satisfied even Mrs. Abernathy's strict standards. Isaac never entered Delilah's bedroom, and they were careful to include the housekeeper in family activities to prevent gossip among the ranch hands. Their relationship deepened through conversations by the fire after Samuel was asleep, shared work in the kitchen garden on Sunday afternoons, and increasingly frequent moments of physical connection, hands touching while passing dishes at dinner. Isaac's arm around Delilah's shoulders during evening walks, and eventually, as autumn deepened toward winter, their first kiss beneath the shelter of the barn doorway during the season's first substantial snowfall. By Christmas, Samuel was 4 months old and flourishing. He had discovered his hands, developed a captivating smile, and begun to recognize the people in his small world lighting up, especially when Isaac entered a room, much to Delilah's amused delight. "He already thinks you hang the moon," she remarked one evening as Isaac successfully soothed the baby after a fussy spell. "I might become jealous." Isaac laughed softly, settling Samuel against his shoulder. "He knows who really matters. I'm just the entertainment." The holiday was celebrated quietly, but joyfully. Mrs. Abernathy outdid herself with a feast that attracted several neighboring ranchers and their families. The house was decorated with pine boughs, red ribbons, and candles, filling the rooms with festive scents and warm light. On Christmas Eve, after the guests had departed and Mrs. Abernathy had retired, Isaac asked Delilah to join him in the study. A small fire burned in the grate, casting a golden glow over the room. On his desk sat a simply wrapped package. "I have something for you," he said, suddenly seeming nervous. "For both of you, actually." Delilah opened the package carefully. Inside was a leather-bound family Bible, the cover embossed with the name Holloway in gold leaf. "Open it," Isaac urged softly. Delilah turned to the family record pages in the center. There, in Isaac's neat handwriting, she found entries recording the births of his parents, his own birth, and that of his sister Mary. Below these was a blank space, waiting. "I thought," Isaac said hesitantly, "that if you were ready, if you felt certain about our future together, we might add Samuel's name here and yours." He took her hand gently. "Delilah Taylor, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Of allowing me to be a father to Samuel and, God willing, perhaps more children someday?" Tears blurred Delilah's vision as she looked from the Bible to Isaac's face, so full of love and hope. Her journey from the desperate widow on an auction block to this moment seemed almost impossible, yet here she was, offered a future filled with security, purpose, and love. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Isaac, I will marry you." His arms encircled her then, drawing her close as he kissed her with a tenderness that spoke volumes of his respect and devotion. When they finally parted, both were smiling through tears. "When?" Isaac asked, still holding her hands. "Spring," Delilah decided. "When the snow melts and the wildflowers return. A new beginning." The winter months passed in a pleasant blur of domestic contentment and wedding preparations. Mrs. Abernathy, thoroughly approving of the match, threw herself into planning the celebration with surprising enthusiasm for a woman who generally disdained frivolous goings-on. Samuel continued to grow and develop, mastering the art of rolling over and beginning to experiment with solid foods. Isaac's devotion to the baby only deepened, and he began building a proper nursery adjacent to what would become their shared bedroom after the wedding. Word of their engagement spread throughout the region, bringing visitors and well wishes. Most were genuinely pleased for the couple, though a few expressed thinly veiled surprise that a wealthy rancher would marry a penniless widow with another man's child. Isaac silenced such remarks with a cold stare that reminded people precisely whose land they were standing on. The wedding took place on a perfect day in early May 1876. The Double H Ranch was transformed for the occasion, with flowering branches adorning the porch and yards of white ribbon festooning the house. The ceremony itself was held beside the river, where spring runoff created a musical backdrop to their vows. Delilah wore a dress of pale blue silk that Mrs. Abernathy had secretly ordered from Denver, her first truly fine garment since her original wedding dress years earlier. Isaac, uncommonly handsome in a new black suit, couldn't take his eyes off her as she walked toward him carrying a bouquet of wildflowers. Samuel, now 8 months old and recently mastering the art of sitting upright, watched the proceedings from Mrs. Abernathy's lap, occasionally contributing enthusiastic babbling that made the assembled guests smile. The simple ceremony was conducted by a traveling preacher who served the scattered ranching communities. When Isaac and Delilah were pronounced husband and wife, the cheer that went up from the gathered friends and neighbors echoed across the valley. The celebration that followed lasted well into the evening with music, dancing, and enough food to satisfy even the hungriest ranch hands. As twilight descended, Isaac drew Delilah away from the festivities, leading her to a quiet spot overlooking the ranch. "Happy Mrs. Holloway?" he asked, his arm around her waist. Delilah leaned against him, savoring the sound of her new name. "More than I ever thought possible," she admitted. "When I think of how we met where I was then." "Providence," Isaac said simply. "I was meant to be in Silver Creek that day." "To save me," Delilah murmured. Isaac turned her gently to face him. "No, love, to find you, there's a difference." He brushed a strand of hair from her face. "I may have helped you in that moment, but you've brought as much to my life as I could ever give to yours. This ranch was just a place before. Now it's a home." As darkness settled over the Double H Ranch, the newlyweds returned to the celebration, where Samuel greeted them with delighted recognition. Mrs. Abernathy, watching the three of them together, discreetly wiped away a tear. "About time this house had a proper family in it again," she remarked to no one in particular. In the years that followed, the Holloway family flourished. Samuel grew into a strong, curious boy with his mother's thoughtful nature and his adoptive father's love of the land. Isaac legally adopted him on his first birthday, ensuring that in name as well as heart, Samuel was truly his son. The Double H Ranch prospered under Isaac's continued capable management, expanding its operations, and weather the economic ups and downs that characterized the cattle industry in the late 1870s. Delilah established a small school on the property that served not only her own children but those of neighboring ranches as well, allowing her to return to her original calling as a teacher. For Isaac and Delilah had indeed been blessed with more children, twin daughters born in the summer of 1878, whom they named Mary and Elizabeth, followed 2 years later by a second son, Joseph. The nursery that Isaac had built before their wedding was eventually expanded into an entire wing of the house as their family grew. Samuel never knew he was not Isaac's biological child until, at age 10, he discovered his original birth certificate while helping his mother organize family papers. The conversation that followed was difficult but ultimately strengthening, as Isaac assured the boy that choosing to be his father was the most important decision of his life. "Some men become fathers by chance," Isaac told him, a hand on his shoulder. "I became yours by choice. That makes you even more precious to me." Each year on the anniversary of Isaac and Delilah's first meeting, they made a private pilgrimage to a particular spot on the ranch, a small rise overlooking the valley, where Isaac had first shown Delilah her new home. There, they would reflect on their journey and renew the promises they had made to each other. "I still can't quite believe how our story began," Delilah remarked on one such anniversary as they watched the sunset paint the mountains in shades of pink and gold. "From that auction block to this." She gestured at the thriving ranch below, where their children played under Mrs. Abernathy's watchful eye. Isaac took her hand, his thumb brushing over the wedding ring he had placed there years before. "I went to Silver Creek that day for cattle business," he mused. "Instead, I found the greatest treasure of my life." Delilah leaned against her husband's sturdy shoulder, content in the knowledge that their unlikely beginning had led to the most perfect of endings, a family built on choice rather than chance, and a love that had transformed them both. Far below in the valley, Samuel chased his younger siblings across the yard, their laughter carrying on the evening breeze. The Double H Ranch, once merely a successful business, had become exactly what Isaac had once hoped for. Not just a place, but a true home. And Delilah, who had once stood trembling on an auction block with nothing but desperation and a fragile hope for her unborn child's future, now stood beside the man who had not just bought her freedom, but had given her the greatest gift of all, the chance to build a life filled with purpose, belonging, and enduring love.